her take it away. We'll have a brief question and answer period after she speaks.
Thank you, everyone, for your attention, and thank you, Ellen, for the invitation to come and speak with you all. So my name is Rachel. I am a farmer, and also I'm a PhD candidate at UVM in the Plant and Soil Science Department. Ellen asked me to speak today, I think partially because climate change is something I think about in my business as a grower, and also the topic of the research that I'm doing for my degree. So I thought I would start out and tell you a little bit about the farm. And because you all are growers yourselves, I didn't feel too terrible about geeking out on some of the soil information. So as I lay the story, we'll go over kind of what soils I'm working with and what we're growing and things like that. I started the business in 2009 at the Intervale here as part of the Farm Incubator Program. Are you all familiar with kind of the context of that program? Briefly? Some yeses, some nos. In short, it's a great incubator program where you can lease land, you can share equipment, you can share greenhouse space. It's a wonderful way to get a business off the ground with without a lot of capital investment. As people probably know, it also has some downsides to it. Farming in a floodplain is never an easy thing. When Leslie Ann was talking about how topography makes a really big difference for growers in this state, she wasn't kidding. We decided to transition the farm out of the Intervale. 2010 was our first growing season at our current location, which is in Moncton, about a half hour south of here. Completely different soils, completely different growing experience, which I'll talk about a little bit more in depth. We're a certified organic vegetable business. The farm where we're at has a long history of agriculture. It was part of the Rotax dairy farm, which the Rotaxes came over from Germany and settled here in the 1700s. At one point, they had about 800 acres of land that they used for a dairy herd. Our barn was built in 1908 and was the last building that they used to milk a much diminished herd of Jerseys up until the 80s. So we have two types of soil that we work with. Marlow loam, which is a glacial deposit. It's full of rocks. It's also wonderfully well drained, very fertile, beautiful consistency. I really love working with it. That's about half of our growing space, and the other half are different degrees of mix between Marlow loam and Vergennes clay, which for those of you who are in Addison County, you know what I mean. Pretty much we grow on one field primarily. It's almost all entirely south-facing, 3% slope. As I mentioned, very well drained. It's kind of ideal. I looked for land for about 6 years before purchasing this property, and I didn't find anything that was quite so lovely, that was within a reasonable distance of Burlington or Montpelier, which were the markets that I was trying to reach. We do have a deep well. We use drip irrigation, which is important kind of in the context of thinking about climate change and how it affects growers. And we are powered with 4 solar arrays at this point. We're a very small farm. As I mentioned, I'm part-time. Well, actually, I'm a full-time student and a full-time farmer. But I do have 3 employees, which is really great. 1 full-time, 2 part-time, and they're a really fabulous team. This is a map that a UVM class drew for me last year when they were doing a research project on the farm, and I just put it up there to kind of show that the field is really broken up into several plots, and this is a couple years old, so now we've got, you know, like a couple more hoop houses and what have you. But I do practice crop rotation. I really believe that kind of managing fertility through green manure is really beneficial for my farm, especially considering the cost of fertilizer and inputs, but also just for basically maintaining soil health over the long term. we try to leave cover crops on for at least 1 year to have both the effect of building fertility and significantly contributing to the organic matter content of the soil. And I love it. I love kind of playing with the cocktails. Like, ooh, are we going to put Sudex on this year and vetch in the fall? Or it's like a little logic puzzle. Most of my product is sold in the Burlington area. I'd say we do about 1/3 of our sales through the Burlington Farmers Market, 1/3 through the Intervale Food Hub, which is a multi-farm CSA that delivers to a lot of workplaces. And then about 1/3 through a combination of restaurants and institutions, including Wake Robin, which is one of my biggest partners. I sell wholesale to their kitchens and then also run a CSA for their staff. As I mentioned, we do veggies. We've kind of been playing with this arc of what diversity of plants to grow makes sense. The greater the diversity, the more I want to cry in July. But it's nice to have the right mix for our markets. So when we started, we actually started only growing basil and garlic. And we made a dairy-free and a nut-free pesto, which we still produce and sell. But since 2009, when that was our main product, we've expanded to just do a very wide range of summer vegetables and have been playing around with season extension by doing some winter greens in our hoop houses. So we do. This is our other crop. It has a lot of implications for our farm. It's really hard on machinery. We spend a lot of time picking rocks. But I put it up there kind of to show that it's a trade-off. We get a lot of benefits from being on this particular piece of property. This is the drawback. The biggest benefit is that we don't have to watch the flood gauge with quite so much anticipation and fear. My last year at the Intervale was the year of Irene. And which is, you know, it's interesting when I say that, it really wasn't Irene that got us. At that point, we were still doing mostly basil and garlic, and really most everything was out of the ground. What got us was the 12 weeks of heavy rain and flooding in the spring. When you have a planting period that's only 16 weeks long and you lose 8 of those planting weeks, you're in trouble. So I kind of, I just say that not to paint the Intervale as the worst place to farm ever, because it certainly isn't. You know, my friends who are down here now farming have been planting for 2 weeks. I'm still waiting for my fields to dry out, even though they're really well drained and there's no chance they're going to flood anytime soon. There are pluses and minuses to each location, and I think about that a lot. I think what makes my experience very different in each location is really how I manage water. And because we're still so new on this piece of land, and I'm still figuring out how to deal with kind of the engineering of an irrigation system, this is where I see my biggest learning curve to be as a grower, in the context of climate change and otherwise. So I'm going to transition now into talking a little bit about my research and the work that I do with UVM. As I mentioned, kind of the overarching theme of my work is how climate change affects farmers in Vermont and what farmers are going to do about it. There are a couple different projects that I'm working on that fall under that theme. The first one, which applies to both my research and my life as a grower, is this issue of spotted wing Drosophila, or SWD. So how many folks here are familiar at this point with SWD? Okay, so because not everybody shook their heads, I'm going to just spend a few minutes on it because I think it's going to be something that you as master gardeners are going to really want to know about. Spotted wing Drosophila is a type of fruit fly. It's new in the US as of 2008. It's new in Vermont as of 2011 or 2012, depending on where you are in the state. It is considered an invasive insect. It falls under my purview when I think about climate change, not because we can make an easy connection and say, this pest is here now because of climate change. It's more that trends that we are seeing that we think are related to climate change affect this insect's life cycle and therefore the degree of impact that this insect is going to have on our crops. What crops, you say? Fruit, berries, strawberries, raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, anything that is sweet with a soft skin. And the reason it's a problem is because the female, right here, has an ovipositor that has 2 rows of very sharp teeth on them. Unlike most fruit flies, which have a blunt ovipositor that's generally much smaller and they can only lay eggs into compromised fruits that are already rotting or that already have some disease, spotted-winged Drosophila can lay their eggs into fruit that is just ripening. Looks pretty good. And they can lay a lot of eggs. So the result is that you have a fruit that actually looks quite whole on the outside, and on the inside you have a lot of larvae. And because this is a fruit fly, and because their population builds very quickly, they can go through many, many generations in a season, you end up in a situation where later in the fall especially, you have this enormous spike in population, and fall ripening strawberries or raspberries are seriously compromised. This has obviously implications for gardeners. My attention has mostly been on commercial growers. There are some management options that people have been experimenting with. Spraying, there are lots of pesticides that you can put on there. The most effective ones are systemics, which I have my own opinions about. But they're very expensive. And for pick-your-own operations, and even for regular not pick-your-own operations, there's the lag time where you can't enter the field for a certain period of time after you've sprayed them, which has consequences for your ability to even harvest the fruit in a timely way. Some people are picking underripe fruit, which doesn't necessarily eliminate the damage that the insect is going to cause, but it does minimize it. Refrigerating fruit helps, freezing fruit helps, but again, these don't kind of take, like the larva is still there, it's just how quickly is it going through its life cycle. Customer management, we have kind of anecdotal stories of a grower in Rhode Island that basically just tells his customers, like, look, here's this pest, take your stuff home, put it in the fridge, put it in the freezer, do not leave it on the counter. And people seem to be relatively okay with it. I don't know how that would work if you weren't in kind of a direct market, farmer directly to consumer situation. Because basically what will happen is if you have like a pint of raspberries that are infected and you leave them on your counter overnight, you're going to go from having a beautiful looking basket of raspberries to a puddle with things in it. So, so not to scare you, my work that I'm doing is specifically on exclusion netting. So I want to see what the most cost-effective way is for specifically organic growers to manage this pest. And exclusion netting does seem to be the most kind of hopeful thing, and we did some preliminary trials last summer that showed that of a certain size, insect netting with openings that are smaller than 0.98 millimeters are effective, but we want to establish the scientific validity or the statistical validity of that finding so that we're doing a more rigorous study this summer. But I also want to know what effect that netting has on the crop. Does that mean that it's going to be a little bit hotter underneath the netting? Is that going to affect the ripening? Is that going to affect any kind of pollination if there's staggered pollination? So there are some things that I'm playing around with in terms of what the effect of this particular management strategy is going to be. I also think it's going to be way more practical for gardeners. When we're talking about people with a 4-acre field, how are they going to manage to enclose something in a way and still be able to manage the crop? So the hypotheses are that the exclusion netting is going to be effective, that it'll decrease the amount of damaged fruit, and that somehow the plants are going to be affected. For those of you who are interested in seeing if you have this in your gardens or in gardens of other folks that you work with. The traps that have been developed that are most effective based on the colors that the insect is attracted to and kind of the chemistry of the baits are really simple to make at home. And you can find a recipe actually for the bait at this website right here. Yep, I can read it. Sorry, it's www.uvm.edu/VT veg and berry. So this is Vern Grubinger's website. /SWD/2013 _SWD_trapping. This is gonna.
Can you just do a search for SWD?
You can do a search for SWD Vermont Veg and Berry and you'll find it. So this is basically a solo cup, a big picnic cup. I actually bought these on a UVM credit card last year, and I had the Associate Dean of Extension call me and be like, so I know this is probably legitimate, but it looks like you were shopping for a picnic. So red solo cup, black electrical tape wrapped around the outside, small hole punch. This is smaller than a normal hole punch. It's 1/8 of an inch, which you can get at like crafting supply stores or online on Amazon. Inside is a smaller vial. In the vial, you put a mixture of yeast and sugar and water. Cover it with some screen that's too small for insects to get through, like window screen. Just cut a small circle and put it on with a rubber band. And then place that in the cup and pour around it a mixture of apple cider vinegar, a little white wine, and a drop of dish soap. Yep. In the lab, we use ethanol. You can use cheap white wine. And then when you hang them, you have to cover them with a lid. You have to hang them under the canopy because the insects really don't go to the cups if they're out in the broad sunlight. And what this is going to do is this is going to tell you if you have them or not. It's not going to really be a good indication of how many you have because we can never really tell how many are going into the cup versus how many are just like hanging out in your raspberries. But it's a good start. They are very, very difficult to identify by sight without a hand lens. You can send them into Margaret Skinner at the UVM entomology lab, but the best indication is to look for the males, which have this spot that is bisected by the first wing vein. And then you can also see on the front of their legs, the front legs have 2 black stripes going through the different tarsi. So since it's a fly, there are 5 tarsi, and it has 2 black stripes on the front.